Excited to welcome Swarthmore College head coach Landry Kosmalski to the basketball podcast. Two-time National Coach of the Year Landry Kosmalski has turned the Garnet into a powerhouse in Division III basketball, consistently ranking amongst the top teams in the nation. Kosmalski's coaching career is marked by numerous accolades and achievements. He has been named the NABC Division III Coach of the Year and has earned the Centennial Conference Coach of the Year award multiple times. His teams have made several NCAA Tournament appearances, including trips to the Elite Eight and Final Four. In 2019-20 season, his team was ranked number one nationally and finished with an impressive 28-1 record. Kosmalski has been recognized as the Region District Coach of the Year in 2017, 2019, 2020, 2023. He has also earned the title of Centennial Conference Coach of the Year in 2016, 17, 19, and 2020. Under his leadership, Swarthmore has made multiple NCAA tournament appearances in 2016, 17, 17, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20, 21, 22, 22, 23, and 23, 24. Additionally, his teams have clinched the Centennial Conference Championship in multiple years. Before joining Swarthmore, Kosmalski served as an assistant coach at Davidson College, where he helped lead the Wildcats to two Southern Conference championships and NCAA tournament appearances. Kosmalski had a prolific playing career at Davidson before moving to the coaching staff. Landry, welcome to the basketball podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
It's going to be fun to talk to you. I really enjoyed diving deeper. Certainly, I've heard your name for a very long time, and it's fun to really dive deep into terms of some of the things that have led to your tremendous success at Swarthmore. And let's start with something that I know is very important to you, and that's playing and coaching with a clear mind. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so I'm entering my 13th year at Swarthmore, and I think the first 10 were just nose to the grindstone, and we were building the program. We got good, and then we were trying to sustain it. And suddenly, I just looked up, and I was like, I'm exhausted and burnt out. And it's funny, I was actually just reading an article on ESPN today about Lane Kiffin and how he's like getting up and doing yoga and meditating. And I read it, and I was like, it resonates so much because the last 2 years have been a real evolution, like some really like low points of like exhaustion and burnout. And part of that, it's not all coaching. It's part about being a father of three and having younger kids. And so you start to realize the things that have worked for you no longer do because they're not sustainable. So you try to figure out a new way to handle the stress and strain of the job and parenthood. So for me, that just meant figuring out when I get breaks, figuring out how I get my mind clear. Because the reality is, and what I learned this last year, when I would say about mid-January, it clicked for me. Like I have to relax. I have to let go. I have to surrender to all this strain. And once I did, I noticed I was at peace. And then what happened is we started winning. And so I looked back after the season and I said, I think my energy was so much better for our guys. And I think we're just all at our base level. We're all animals and we read each other's body language and emotional energy. And I think once mine was better, our team responded. And so it just reinforced that I have to have clarity. I have to have a clear mind so that I lead our team and my own family the right way.
So it all sounds great. And we know that the challenge in all this is the concept of shifting a mindset is not that easy. So maybe take us through that process a little bit, because I think what you're saying is so important for all of us as human beings and especially as coaches. So take us through the process of going through this from this grinded out mentality to a positive psychology approach that's transformative for you and shifting your mindset.
One of the lessons I learned as a player, and I've learned again, I had to relearn as a coach, is I think we make changes when we're at our lowest point. So for me, I'm not embarrassed or shy to admit, like I was at a really low point last year. And this was even before our season started. This was back in September. And even the year before in 22-23, we went to the Final Four. And a lot of people don't know, I took 3 days off in the middle of the year. And I've never missed a game of practice in my life as a player or coach. And so suddenly it was like I had to do that because I couldn't do it anymore. And so that helped me that year get through a little low point. But then this year hit a low point like back in September and just realized, hey, I need to get some help. I need to talk to someone. I need to prioritize my own emotional health because I can't live like this. And so once I did that and I started seeing the benefits, which did come slowly, it was a process. It wasn't like overnight light bulb went off and I was super serene because that's not my personality, but I did notice just incremental improvement in just having better perspective and slowing down and being able to have, like I mentioned earlier, a little more clarity which again, I saw impact our players in a positive way.
Let's talk about the impact on your players, especially from that perspective of this is hard for you in a sense because they're used to a certain person. And now in a ways you're presenting them a different person. So maybe talk to them about the challenges of that. And then maybe how did you overcome maybe some of resistance from your players or your staff who are accustomed to your old methods?
Looking back to last year, I don't know if our players would have been able to articulate a difference. I'm not a big yeller and screamer. Our practices, we're intense and we're very detail oriented. We get on their asses. It's intense, but we don't yell and scream a lot. If our players are watching this, they may disagree, but that's how I feel we coach. I think it was just more, I think what I was saying to them and the way I was saying it, I just had better ideas. I was talking with Joe Crispin yesterday on the phone, and he mentioned like how you lose creativity when you're in it and you have your blinders on, and how you have to step away and find time to read or relax. Or he was talking about mowing the lawn and getting ideas. And I always say when I sit on an airplane, I get ideas because there's nothing else to occupy my mind. There's no distractions. So building that in, which again, I think if you're old school or old fashioned, you say, oh no, you can just grind it out. I think that really limits you ultimately, and in a lot of ways can lead you to treating people worse because you're not at your best. So just finding that time to get those little pockets. And then I think it just, again, I don't know if our players would have noticed a discernible difference other than, I guess if you ask them as a group, they may go, yeah, coach seemed a little more at peace and we felt a little more relaxed and a little more confident. And so I think it was subtle, but definitely.
So is it just a question of kind of if you were advising other coaches that are maybe facing the same challenge, is it simply advising them to find time to be able to take breaks away from the grind? Is that as simple as it gets to start?
That's one strategy. I think everyone does different things. Some people go for walks in the woods. Some read a religious text. Others, like I do some meditation in the mornings. I built that in. Exercise, obviously. I know Coach McKillop used to exercise religiously 7 days a week, I think, to get, some of that energy out, some of those that endorphin feeling. So I think it's really different for everyone. I definitely have some strategies in place that help me when it comes to resting and certain sleep habits and nutritional changes I've made. And so all those things just, I think, have put me in a better place to have more physical and emotional energy for the people around me.
Awesome. And talk to us a little bit about the G3 system.
Yeah. So G3, we actually don't even call it that. That's just what I like shorthand, what I write, but we just call it goals. Some people recognize the name. De La Salle football won a lot of games back probably 15, 20 years ago. They had the longest winning streak in, I think, the country or ever. But I remember reading the book about them, which I'm blanking on the name now, but the book about their coach, Bob Ladouceur, and how he had his guys just to stay in the moment, do short-term goals. It was, hey, we're going to do at the beginning, like on a Monday, what do you want to get better at this week? And so for our guys, what we've said is, hey, one basketball goal, and then one that's either academic or personal. And the personal ones usually come in over the breaks when we're not in school. Is, hey, I want to get Christmas presents. And I got to call my grandmother, something for that week only. And then the last G in there, we added maybe 4 years ago, is just like a gratitude, something you're grateful for, which is interesting. I would say 80, 90% of the time when the guys give a gratitude, it's usually about a relationship. Hey, my parents were able to come to the game. I got dinner with them afterwards, or all the families were here and we got to spend time with them. That's what they're usually grateful for. There's always the random guy who's like, yeah, the Patriots won yesterday. There's guys that do that sometimes, but just keeping an optimistic and grateful mindset. Those 3 goals, and we put them on little note cards and we read them in front of the team, and they get with the partners so they hold each other accountable for the week, and then they tape them up in their locker. After 4 weeks, you got 4 goals and you go, oh, I did get better at pivoting and ripping when a guy's pressuring me. And they'll look back, and suddenly at the end of the year, there's team goal cards on there, and they can look back and get confidence saying, I've really gotten a lot better at these 15 little skills. And it does. And again, it just keeps the mindset of, let's just take it like today. Let's get better at that today or this week, not like looking ahead to February or March.
I love that. Love that idea. And I think I can relate to you on a lot of levels, especially the intensity, the grinded up mentality that we were brought up with. So finding lighthearted moments is obviously a big thing to be able to do that. And sometimes you have to orchestrate that initially. So is the doll still relevant? And is that still part of the program?
The doll, Alphonse, yeah, you've done some research. Yeah, that was, so you mentioned positive psychology earlier. A lot of this came when I realized our team, as we were getting good, they didn't need to hear my voice as much. And how can we tailor our language to benefit them the most? And especially with some of the personalities we were coaching. So I read this Sean Aker book. He's a Harvard guy, big in the positive psychology world. And one of the ideas we got from there was just like having something that, for like guys who take it seriously, something that just breaks the tension and can be a little silly, but also as a positive reinforcement. You don't want to lose ball, or hey, you got to recruit to commit. Like you get, the doll we use is this Swedish friar, long story. But so you have this guy, Alphonse, and you get him. Now, I will say I have done a poor job with staying consistent with that. Someone will have Alphonse for 3 weeks and I'm like, oh, shoot, we got to move Alphonse to someone else. But it's just little ideas like that. And I'll give you one other that we can use a couple times a week is just, we call it BTS, which stands for big time shit. And we put it at the end of our film sessions. We'll just be very critical and constructive criticism in film. We got to do this better. We got to do this. But before we go on the court, the last thing is look at these 5 to 10 clips of guys just doing excellent work, excellent effort, or they learned and they're doing something they didn't do the game before. So now whatever they heard before, we leave on a positive note. So just, we've tried to incorporate little things like that. I think we could do it better, but I've definitely noticed that it helps, especially at a place like ours where guys are coming from class and they've been taking tests, just to get a reset and have this be the fun part of the day.
That's awesome. And I love how you changed the name from BTS. When you present on it, you call it stuff.
Yeah. I didn't know podcast etiquette. I don't know if you
Yeah, it's all good here, Landry. And the doll idea, even the fact that you forget it sometimes, is probably adds magic to it in a way. Like it doesn't become this stressor for you to, oh, we got to word this, we got to do this. And I've been on teams where it's been like that, and it's almost like too much. So I love that, actually, that natural thing that was an unintentional consequence, so to speak. Getting into basketball, there's so many questions I have for you, style of play, all the different things, just so much success at Swarthmore. And let's start with pressing and pressing after misses, which I think is a unique concept that many coaches have explored and you've had some success with. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I was hoping to pick your brain about pressing off misses. If you watch some film of teams around the country, like I tried to watch some Samford film this year, some of the Marshall women, the coach that just got the job at Tennessee.
Kim Marshall, yeah.
And just trying to speed the game up. I read this article 15 or 20 years ago. Malcolm Gladwell wrote an article in the New York Post. You're shaking your head. You've probably seen it. I think it was in his book, David versus Goliath. And it's basically, I'll never forget, one of the guys he talked to was a Nigerian father who grew up playing soccer, and he's coaching his daughter and he's watching the game. And he said, why aren't we using the whole court? It makes no sense. Like our game, if you can use the whole court like they do in soccer, using the whole field, I think conventional wisdom says play in 2 halves. But I think there's something to that. Again, I think it depends on your personnel and your depth. But I think if you can, to make this a full court game, I think can be advantageous because it takes people out of this conventional these set-based systems.
So contrarian thinking, divergent thinking, I know you're one of those people that kind of goes in those directions, but somewhat out of necessity too. Like coaching at a smaller college, you're not always coaching perfect lineups in that way. So that's a part of the process. Before we get into kind of pressing on misses and maybe us discussing it, how much of this kind of thinking did evolve from your time at Davidson as a player versus you had to figure out on your own as a coach?
As you were asking that, I had this like epiphany at Davidson. If people know Coach McKillop, like what I learned there is just, it's hard to explain how much, like the scope, because he's so detail oriented and he's strong willed that we never accepted like a compromise until we were trying to do both things, like just find a way. And it builds this toughness and this willpower. So you learn that. And then I think as you were asking it, I realized I've always been a contrarian. You can ask my parents growing up, just always debating the opposite side. But also I think coming to Swarthmore, to your point, I think it's been a really good combination of you have to think differently to do well here. And I think that's at times the first 3 years when we were losing, I was really resentful about that. And now that I'm going in my 13th year, I think it's been one of the biggest blessings of my life to go, hey, we have to figure these out the hard way. It's made me a much better coach to say, hey, we're a little limited here, we're a little unathletic here, we're gonna have to find a way anyway. I think it really, really pushes you to find solutions. So I think it's a little bit of a combination of those things.
I love it. I love it. In-depth analysis of your personality and where you came from right here, right now. It's beautiful. Going back 30 years ago, I had a mentor at the University of Victoria named Guy Vitry. So Ken Shields is a very famous basketball mind in the world of basketball. Guy Vitry followed him. But that was the first coach I was ever around who jammed the outlet on misses. So jammed the ball on misses. And essentially, what we're saying is full court pressed on misses. To me, that was something that was very common. And I think the influence of the NBA has changed a lot for all of us because the NBA generally they get back on defense. And then Aaron Fern, a few other people, obviously tagging up has come into play, which has brought back this concept of maybe it's a defensive transition system. But what it is an outstanding full court pressing system as well. But to me, if you think about full court pressing on misses, it probably comes back to this notion of jamming outlets, which a lot of coaches used to do. So maybe I need to get a coach on that still does that or used to do that to get an influence. But what is the mentality of that? Because that starts it right there. Ball pressure starts as soon as the other team gets the ball.
This is great context for me because ever since I'm just going back to my time at Davidson as a player and then a coach. So going back to the mid 90s, transition D has always been about getting back as quickly as you can and setting up. So I didn't even know that people had done that back then. That was even the norm. My question when you were asking is you said jamming the outlet. Do you mean as they outlet the guy, you're right there and you're stopping him or you're denying him?
Yeah,
or
the phrasing's a little
pressuring
weird.
the rebounder.
Pressuring the rebounder means in their world, it was jamming the outlet, meaning they couldn't outlet the ball quickly. That's what they said, but you could call it jamming the rebounder if you want in terms of the visual. But the idea was to prevent a quick outlet and to prevent clearly to be able to take away what we would now phrase as those first 3 seconds in transition because they can't move the ball.
Yeah. So my thoughts on that, and we're still working through some of this, but so when you said jamming the outlet, like we always use like the outlet guy. So I thought you meant like the point guard. Now I understand what you're saying. I think,
isn't it hard to get to the point guard sometimes? That's the thing, but it's easy to get to the ball and disrupt the ball.
It can be. And I think that's where you talked about tagging up. And I've talked to a lot of people about that this summer. It's interesting. I don't think Aaron's doing it at Charlotte. That's one thing, but also it is more of a defensive transition thing. As I'm thinking through the way we play, which a lot of times is in transition on offense, I think there's so many variables to where we're going to be. I don't know if we can say, hey, every time we're going to do this. And maybe that's just me being uncomfortable with something new, but I think there's the idea of tagging up or getting matched to your guy is beneficial for transition D. But for instance, tagging up, we're going to be a little small this year. Like we got a few 5'9", 5'10" guards. I don't know if they tag up and push below the foul line, they're going to get it and tap it out. So I think it might be more beneficial for them to get close to a guy to be ready to pressure on long rebounds. Or to your point, you have your crashers going in, and if they don't get the rebound, they're right there. One thing I learned from watching the film this year, I made this note and underlined it. At Samford, for instance, when they did press on misses and they were there, like when the guy got the ball, it worked better. Sometimes if a guy got a rebound and had a dribble or two start and they ran at him, they would get burned. So I think you have to have, you need, again, this is anecdotal, of course, but I would guess you can press on misses if you're right there when they rebound the ball. If they're not, I think it's going to be difficult. So and if you disagree with that or you've seen it otherwise, I would love to know because we're still trying to figure some of this out if we're going to be able to do it.
I just know, again, a lot of coaches that have tried tagging up have rethought it in exactly what you said. It's a transition defensive system more than anything. But more so, I think a lot of them have found that it allows them to be up the floor so that they want to continuously press. It's easier because you're already matched up. So I think that's really been the mindset of it, that I think almost anyone that's gone in on it to a certain extent has evolved it and said, this isn't really about rebounding. This is about defensive transition. And then if we're a pressing team, we can press all the time.
When I was younger, I was very black and white, and it's part of the way my brain works. I would love to go, hey, let's just work on tagging up and just pressing on misses. But I've done this so long and then not have to worry about transition D, like the traditional transition D. But we're going to have to do both, right? There's going to be some times where there's going to be transition and we got to work on it. And if there's one thing about transition D that I know to be true, it's that when you're younger, your transition D is worse. There's no bigger correlation between like youth and struggle in transition D because it's so fast and their brains aren't processing quick enough. So I think older teams, if I were to bet, they probably transition overall much better than like younger, less experienced teams.
Okay, so I want to go into that. Your point there is beautiful because one of the key stages of expertise is the ability of an expert to distinguish the unimportant from the important. That in your early phases of development, say we're developing some type of skill like transition defense, that's obviously a tactic as much as a technique, is that early on, we're aware of too much and we take in too much information. It's not the fact that we don't take in it, we take in too much. And then as we get better at it, we start to distinguish much better. Oh, this isn't that important, but this is really important. So then it helps you make better decisions in that process. And again, what's the only way to speed that up is experiential repetition of those things in really random and variable ways. And I know we're going to get into that anyways. So it connects with the games approach and those different things that kind of, I know you do a little bit within your program too.
I'm smiling because in my mind, the reason that freshmen stink at transition D early on is because their brains are moving so slowly that they've played lower competition and they're getting back and they're like, I've got plenty of time. Like just their primal cue is it's not that urgent. I do think that's part of it, but what you just said, a lot of it is they're frozen. As you said, they're taking in 7 cues when the older guys are like, there's 1 or 2 things I got to decide, and they do it. These guys are doing a check down of 7 things that slows them down because they don't know. This is what you do, and this is really helpful for me to go, hey, this is what expertise is, and understand psychologically why that's happening, because that can help me coach them a little better. I just always thought it's because you got to light a fire under their ass and make them their brains move a little quicker. But I think it could be about prioritizing.
Yeah, pace of play and different things like that certainly are a factor. So I'm not discounting that. But generally, that's what I would suggest is that to be able to help a player, especially a young player, is actually limit their buffet. I say the buffet. They can't eat at the full buffet. They're not ready for the full buffet. So just give them a little bit of salad, a little bit of pasta. These are the 2 most important things to make a decision based on. So it's actually by limiting their decisions, we're increasing the likelihood that they make the right decision. Whereas a veteran player can eat at the full buffet, so they can have more decision possibilities because they're able to distinguish what's important versus what's unimportant. And Landry, I'll just give you a quick example. Anyone that's taught in a classroom, and I know you've probably lectured and you've done some stuff like that where you're in the classroom and you are aware of the students that are off task. Like I'm still at this point, 35 years in, I can stand in any gym in the world with kids or any classroom and I'm aware of who's off task. But what I'm able to do now better than ever is just think that's not really that important. That's not that important. That's not that important. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Okay, that matters. I got to nip that in the bud because if that spreads, that's a problem, right? That's the difference in this process, moving this expertise continuum. And it's amazing. It's an amazing thing to think about that. And how can you apply that to your players?
Sounds like parenting. Yeah, picking your battles, right?
Anything but painting on walls, right? Is it causing damage? Is it causing someone harm? Is it causing something damage? That thing. Yeah, it's just some black and gray, but yeah, it is fun. Love it. Where do we go from here? Let's talk about practice. Let's talk about your practices. How much have they changed over your time at Swarthmore? And from what our mutual friend Joe Crispin has mentioned, that you've gone to a little bit more of games approach, constraints-led approach over your time. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. First, I'd say overall, it's changed very little in 12 years. I think I would say 6, 7 years ago, I think we got the template in terms of the rhythm of practice and like the order we wanted to do things. But to your point, and I'll tell you, we learned the lesson again, 6, 7 years ago. We couldn't beat Franklin and Marshall in our conference, and they're coached by Glenn Robinson, who coached 49 years, and he was a master. And you would watch them in games and they just adjusted on the fly without anyone saying anything. And you just saw them react. And I learned over time that they're playing a lot in practice and their guys are able to make those decisions. Whereas we were a little bit more looking some stuff up on you today. There was something about one of your YouTube videos is you don't plan a practice like you choreograph
it's not a dance
recital.
Yeah.
We've definitely been closer to this end of the spectrum with the dance recital. It's, hey, let's do these fundamentals. Let's build it up. Part method, build it up to the whole. And our guys have gotten good at a lot of different things, but we have been burned in the past about like just reading and reacting in the game. So we have tried to pull that more toward the middle of the spectrum where we're like, hey, let's play and let's react and let's scramble and let's find solutions. And I think we've gotten a little better at it, but also we try to keep it balanced because one of our strengths is that our guys can handle a lot of different situations. Whereas I think some people play and they're like, we'll be good at these 3 or 4 main things. We can do a lot of different things detailed, but to your point, we have to make it a little bit more games based for sure.
Just on that part about the dance recital, look, I've been around coaching long enough. I'm never going to say anything's right or wrong in that sense, because there's a lot of right ways and a lot of wrong ways, depending on your personnel, depending on your situation. It all depends. But the one thing I will say is that when we do these memorized rote learning type of drills, that we strip perception. So if you want players to be adaptable, then if you remove their perception of this novel environment or the novel stimuli, then it's less likely that they're going to be able to adapt to a game situation. So probably your example there with Franklin Marshall, that they probably played a lot within, and this is not new stuff, by the way, a lot of coaches, small-sided games, a lot of different things like that. It's just a question of what is the balance for you? What is the balance for your players? What is your comfort and confidence with these things? And it's all variable, but hey, why am I speaking? Look at all the success you've had. So obviously you're doing a lot right.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I agree with you. I'm also like thinking back though to some lessons we've learned, where one example is like ball screen D. When we were, and we do this periodically, like when we flat hedge it, when we started flat hedging it, we were, I watched this game on film, like, why are we getting burned the whole damn time? And I watched the film and I realized like the hedger was not wide enough, low enough, arms out. Like we missed this detail. The guy coming off didn't have his arms up to stop the look back pass. The guy helping in from the corner, so it's a 3-man operation. The guy in the corner was not high enough to like tag the cutter. And I go, we did all these wrong and they just ran 45 ball screens against us and we struggled. So we wanted to break it down to 3-on-3 and have one coach watch the big and one coach watch the guard and one coach watch the wing and make sure we're doing those details. Now, I think to your point is once you get those details down and those habits down, now you got to do it when they're playing. So they do it on the fly. And that 5 years ago, we were not doing very well because we would get all these details down and look great in practice. And we get in the game, it was going too fast and everything broke down.
Task simplification. Love it. I'm into it. I guess my question is, was it the technique or was it the fact that the offense was more adaptable than the defense? And that's a part that comes to it is maybe your technique wasn't that bad. And maybe it's just that the offense had solutions and your players didn't have solutions yet. And there's a challenge that I say, is it the chicken or the egg? What comes first in terms of those things? The other thing I'll just add to that is that generally when you're doing film sessions, are you talking to players about decisions or are you talking to players about technique? Are you sitting there and saying, oh, somebody beat them off of a closeout? And are you spending your time talking to that player about the technique, or you're talking to them about the decision about where they were supposed to close out relative to who they were closing out on? And that seems to be a connector for some coaches, because I think generally, if I probably listen to most coaches' film sessions, they're talking about tactics, not technique. Thoughts?
It's a good question. I think we talk about effort in film, and then I do think technique. Like now, your closeout example threw me for a loop because about 4 years ago, we go, you know what, we're doing this conventional closeout technique, and we go, what's important? What's important is we don't want this guy to shoot a catch and shoot 3, and we don't want to give him a straight line drive. Now you figure it out. When you're closing out, you go, hey, I'm a little longer. Maybe I give him a little more space, or I'm a little quicker. I get up closer. I need a little more length close. And he's a shooter or he's a driver. That's closing out. That's decisions, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we got better at in closeouts. And we've slowly added that to different parts about just figure out a way. Don't just go out throwing your hands up and have your weight back. Like you got to figure it out. And so
there's definitely a technique to it. To your point, there's definitely a technique, but the technique is more individualized than we realize.
Yes.
Yeah. Keep going. Sorry.
No, that's all. I think we do a lot of motion, a lot of details. So we do talk about, hey, angles and getting guys off of you to be able to throw the pass, because a lot of guys put the ball over their head and the defense pushes them back on their heels. So we do talk a lot about probably more, now that you mentioned it, probably more about technique than most.
Love it. So talk to me about then teaching angles on screen. So how would you go about teaching that, Landry, to your players? Maybe they played a little bit and they're struggling with these angles. So what are you doing in terms of a coaching intervention to help them set better screening angles?
everything's like, I'm saying 6 or 7 years. We made a lot of changes. Like we did a few years ago, we changed from screening to more of this Princeton concept of splits. So now instead of hunting a guy and sometimes getting out physical on it by a more athletic guy or stronger guy, we just want to come together and then read it based on what the defense is giving us.
So more of an area screen than a head hunting screen?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And so when we get to that spot, the guy who's using the screen, we just, whatever your defender's doing, you split one way, the other guy goes the other way. So we just try to do it quicker. Sometimes you do have to talk about where on the court you want that. We don't want guys going really deep. Let's say you passed 2 guys in the slot and 1 slot passed to the wing. We don't want them going down to the nail and setting a guard on guard screen away, because now if you reject that screen or you curl that screen, you got a really small window to throw it in. So we're saying, hey, set this right around the 3-point line or maybe a step or 2 in, so there's a bigger window to hit a guy if he cuts to the basket on a slip or on a reject or curl. So that's where we talk about the spot or positioning of the screens.
I love it. And one of the questions I wanted to get into with you anyways is this area, and we've circled around it, is this concept of kind of simplifying decisions on screens and reads and different things like that. I guess the one question I want to ask, a theoretical standpoint, is if running motion, I know it's not like necessarily pure motion, there's some rules and structure to it, I get, but running a motion is, do they ever make a wrong decision, or do they just make a decision that's different than the one that you thought they should have made? Is a question that I ask motion coaches, because that becomes the foundation about what will you actually stop it for to be able to coach a situation.
In motion, the wrong decision is because you don't read your defender. Really, we just do what the defender gives us. So if there's a screen and he's going over, then we're going to go the other way. If he goes under, then we're going to pop back. That's when we get stagnant and bogged down, is when you make the wrong read. And let's say they go over, and instead of making them pay, you pop out. Now you're not open. Now the guy's stuck with the ball because you read it wrong. That is what we stop it for. If we do 3-on-3, we'll just say they'll do one wrong split, and we're like, no, you're off, because we just want them to have some pain about going, wow, it's really important I read it correctly. And sometimes we'll do it with no dribble, so that now they go, oh, if I read it incorrectly, my teammate's stuck with the ball and he's screwed. So that's where the motion decisions, and Coach McKillop told me this years ago, motion is physically draining, but it's also emotionally draining, because you are making a lot of decisions on possessions about how to get open, when to get open, how to use a screen, how to finish your cutout. There's a lot of emotional energy that you have to commit to motion.
I love you saying that, because I think too often we think about physical effort and not cognitive effort, and expenditures, especially around cognitive effort. So I'm glad you said that, because that's something that I think workload management and these different things that we've talked about in terms of practice duration, et cetera, we need to factor in as the cognitive effort it takes. And if you're just doing rote memorized drills, it's not a lot of cognitive effort, versus, as you said, there's constant decision making. That is a serious mental tax on your players. So I'm really glad you made that connection. So I love that. Again, you simplified it for me. The decision is relative to the defender. Now, the other part of that is, who makes the first decision? Because that seems to be another thing. Is it like, so if we're converging on a screen, a screener and a cutter, who makes the first decision, or can either of them make the first decision?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I was learning, first off, I played and coached motion at Davidson. So I came up here playing to run motion, but we really took off when I got connected with Harry Peretta up at Villanova, the women's coach. And I'm biased, but I think he's the best in the country or in the world at motion. His brain is, he's a genius.
Breaking down tape for anyone that sends him tape. That's the type of guy.
He's coaching some high school girls. He's coaching some 12-year-old boys. He's all over the place because he's a coach. And he loves teaching motion. But I don't even remember what they did, but they had it like
numbering system. They had a numbering system.
Numbering's just kind of like the first person to call it. I thought it was a little strange. Ours is based on the cutter. Now, if we go through scouting and we say, hey, they're gonna switch screens, then the screener is gonna call the slip first, like the numbered cut for the slip. They're gonna call it so the cutter knows, hey, I'm just gonna pop. But generally, if people are just getting through screens, trying to blow up screens, the cutter is gonna make the call on that.
So I love this, because I want to connect it for coaches that run a little bit more structure, because within that structure, basketball decisions supersede basketball plays is the concept, right? If there's an advantage, take advantage of the advantage, don't run the play. So that kind of decision progression or progression of reads of who makes the decision is really important, I feel, to be able to highlight who can take advantage of certain things within sets as well. So I loved your answer with that. And yeah, Harry's tremendous. He did the podcast a long time ago, and just amazing the stuff that he's come up with.
Every time I talk to him, I'm like, I think he's told me everything he knows. And then I'll talk to him and I get two more nuggets. And it just enhances everything we do because it's just, there's so much in his brain that's such a high level of expertise when it comes to motion.
And the reality is now he has a safe space to be able to experiment with things, which is what I'm grateful I have too. You don't have as safe a space because it's a job and you've got to obviously be successful to be able to maintain the job. But within that, there's still room for obviously adaptation and all those different things. So maybe connect for us transition offense at Swarthmore with the motion. Talk to us about those two things. How are they connected?
So we push the ball a lot. And this is all coming from Coach McKillop. I made up none of this, but the whole philosophy to the push is most people think it's to get early shots. That is a part, but that's the smaller part. If you can outrun your opponent and get a shot early when they didn't run back, that's an advantage because you've practiced it and you're in better shape. The bigger part though is to get the defense like both literally and figuratively on its heels, where they feel like they're just reacting to you. So once you push, the word we use a lot in our program is flow. Like we want to get right to offense. There's no pull it out and set it up. It's just we want to just keep it moving so the pressure just stays on them the whole time. So that is like that flow connects the transition push to the motion. And then so you're running motion, ideally against a defense that's reeling a little bit or is a little bit fatigued.
Love it. I love that. That's a great explanation of that concept that goes with it. Connect for us a little bit about your defensive philosophy then. I'm always curious to ask coaches that have been around motion, how that influences what they do defensively.
A lot of it depends on how many guys you have. Because again, in my mind, I would try to play 94 feet offense and defense the whole game. That's what I think the ideal is for me. Haven't really gotten there yet. And there's some variables in there, like when you have an All-American and you need him to play 36, 37 minutes, you're probably not going to press for 40 minutes. So you mix and match. I would say, though, we've based our defensive system off the personnel we have at Swarthmore. Not as much in how it's compatible with our offense, although I do think that's an important thing to consider. It's more about what's going to give us the best advantage defensively with our size, athleticism. That's what we're looking at more than comparing it to the offense or combining it with the offense.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think it was you, I read in an article that kind of, you have a few reservations about some of the traditional ways that we teach defense, but I am curious, connect that for us from what you learned at Davidson to now about how you teach defense.
It's been an evolution in that when I was, sorry about this alarm in the background, everything's.
Let me know if you need to escape.
No. This is a town alarm. We're one of 7 towns in the country that just blares this alarm through town. It's been an evolution where when I was at Davidson as a player and coach, which a lot of people were doing then was like forcing baseline, right? All the help could come from what we considered an advantageous spot, keeping people out of the middle of the floor. As I was here 3-4 years, I noticed we were not as athletic a team. I said to myself, I'm like, why are we giving people a half step that they're already more athletic than us? And we were getting a lot of fouls. The big helping or the guard trying to finish, we were fouling people. And we said, okay, what can we do? And we went to the pack and we studied the pack a lot, and that helped. But then it became what we were talking about earlier with the closeout is like, how do I, Landry, need to guard you, Chris, right here at the top of the key? Like just basically saying, what is the best, what can limit our rotations, limit our scrambling? How can I keep you from getting to your strength and use my strengths? And we just play our defense based on that. Now it's still team-based. We want to have gap help. We want to have help if a guy does get beat, but we just want to make it like, what is my strength and what is taking away his strength within the framework of a team D.
I love it. I love it. Very simple in that way. So talk to us then, how are you developing that within practice? Because generally, again, your players pretty quickly will start to understand each other's strengths if you make them aware of kind of this focus point. So what are you doing in practice? Are you sometimes modifying, this player today is this, or this player today is that, to get them to be adaptable? Or how are you helping them evolve that defensive understanding?
A lot of it's building up. As good as Virginia has been defensively, And the way they rotate, which I think is very high level, and they have since Coach Bennett's been there. I heard from a coach that watched their practice, they do a ton of one-on-one D. And so that was an epiphany to me, where we still, all this team D doesn't matter if the guy gets beat off the dribble. So we just worked a lot on putting guys in disadvantageous situations on long closeouts or short closeouts, but just trying to guard better one-on-one. And then you build it up to 3-on-3, 4-on-4 with like bigger, wider gaps. How can we gap help and still recover? That's how we try to do it, is with more one-on-one, with some small sided games. And then when we put it all together, then you have to add, and we tend to break down like ball screen D or post D, which is, by the way, non-existent now. We barely practice post D. Transition D, we break all those down, and then we try to get together at the end and put them all together. Hey, we're going to transition. They're going to go ball screen. We got to play. We got to react. That's how we tend to build our defense, which I think is probably what most people do.
So in the one-on-ones, are you playing more one-on-one now? And if so, what are some different ways that you're playing one-on-one?
But sometimes at the beginning of practice, just with the fundamental drill, we'll put a guy like on a guy's hip at a bad advantage, like at the elbow, and we'll give the guy a dribble and we'll say, hey, cut him off and then wall him up. So we're practicing like what we say 1,000 times a day is like finish the D. No space, no crack for him to score. Like we don't want to give up anything within 10 feet without just really, then one-on-one early, like the first practice, we'll just be at top of the key and hand it to the guy just to like practice instigating and practice like finishing. But then after that, we do get to a coach driving a gap and you stunt and now you're recovering. Or you pass to a coach and you got a long closeout from the paint to the guy on the wing, just trying to put them in situations that are tough. And the one thing I love and our guys hate, but we like full court one-on-one. It's just like, hey, let's one-on-one, full court, who's tougher, and just do that. I guess a few different situations. I feel like I'm forgetting something too. Oh, I know what it is. And I think Virginia did this. We call it faking game, where we put them like more at the elbows, so a little tighter, so you get one dribble and you're working on your pivot fakes, your shot fakes, and then the defense is working on staying down versus fakes, which has been a weakness of ours, is like leaving our feet. So we're trying to read what's his body language, when's he going to fake, and then offensively working on fakes, which again, we need a lot of work with.
I love that. That's such a valuable thing to be able to get, especially as I think about the youth level, is that seems to be a thing watching a lot of AU. My daughters are playing, and just how many fakes make people really look silly just because nobody's ever told them to not go for the fake, just work, staying down. I don't know what term you use. What terms do you use in terms of staying down on fakes? Is it like some people obviously walling up, splitting their feet, different things like that? What are you using in terms?
Our associate coach made a good point a year or two ago. He said, Shane Leffler, he said, we don't want to say stay on our feet, because then when a guy goes to shoot, your guys are like rule followers. They don't jump and contest. So we just say stay down versus fakes. And again, that takes some practice. And obviously we're not going to bat 1,000, but it's funny though, the longer I do it, we used to like Coach McKillop, Coach till he was, I think, 71 years old. And when I was with him, he's in his 60s, he's done it like 25 years. He had so much knowledge, and he said all these things that I thought at the time were just completely bonkers, but he saw the game to such a level of detail. He was really big on fakes, about teaching our guys how to foot fake, how to pass fake. I think in his mind, we could have done it better, but you see how advantageous that is and how much of an equalizer it is if you're playing against more athletic teams. So we really told our guys this summer, like, work on your fakes, work on slowing down. I do think it's a very hard thing to teach. You would obviously know it much better than me, but just how do you make a fake look real, I think is a really hard thing to teach, at least at our level where we don't have the individual instruction in the offseason. You're trying to teach it in a rapid fire practice. We don't give it the level of detail we need.
I smile because I can't tell you how many coaches told me a shot fake is a shot not taken. And that seems very simple in a sense, but in a reality, to actually make it look like a shot not taken is obviously a very difficult thing. And I will just caution coaches that are listening. I do feel, and you don't have to agree with this, I do feel that you should not teach shot fakes or any type of fakes at a young level. So let's say prepubescent basketball, because I feel like those things take away decisions about being aggressive, about attacking. If you could shot fake, for example, you should have just shot it. because that kind of connection to the game will help build you long term more than learning how to turn down shots with a fake, for example. So it's like a detail that I think evolves over time. And then I love the faking game. That's such a great, cool way to be able to do it. And to me, I visualize that saying, okay, let's start in a faking game. And if you can't score, then you can kick out to a teammate, and then it can stay stimulate alive, small-sided game type of situation. And I love that. This is just fun stuff. Coach McKillop obviously had such a huge influence on you in the game. What are some influences beyond that since you've left Davidson? Because I know, again, like staying in one system, staying in one place, as brilliant as he was and as successful as he was, you can't be that person, obviously. You've got to be yourself. So talk to us about maybe some of the other influences beyond that have led to so much of this success for you.
Wow, that's tough. There's a lot. First, I'd say that just the general one, the longer I do it, the more I realize that I'm a product of my parents. Like I learned a lot of coaching from Coach McKillop, but the way I lead and the way I handle situations within our team, sometimes you're like a father or a parent, that is from my mom and dad. And my dad played in the NBA and my mom is one of these really wise, enlightened people. So I feel fortunate to have had two parents that gave me both strengths of those. And over time, I've learned how to utilize them better. I would say too, as I've been here, one of the things we talk about, we take this concept from Joe Ehrman, former NFL player. There's a book written about him by Jeffrey Marks, A Season of Life, just about how to build men. So that's been a really powerful impact on me. And then also I mentioned Sean Aker earlier, the positive psychology. And also we got some lessons from a team building leadership group called The Program out of Boston, a bunch of ex-military guys. And they came and trained our team twice in the early years. And you think it's going to be like a lot of yelling, screaming in your face. And that's not what it is at all. It can be, but it's more about you have to do this for the guy to your left and the guy to your right. And we're doing it for each other. And it has nothing to do with you. And so all those influences together help establish our culture, our mentality.
I love it. And obviously you've sustained success through a lot of different, obviously, changes in teams and rosters and in different programs and all the different competitors you've had. So talk to us a little bit about what strategies or what things do you think you can relate to other coaches about sustaining success?
The first thing I think of is adjusting. So I learned this from just watching some of the greatest coaches out there. So one, Roy Williams, right? I'm at Davidson in 2006 and I'm scouting them and I'm just like in love with this Carolina stuff. Like they just had these counters and it was all just so cohesive. And then I turn on a few years later, I'm like, they're not doing anything. Like they're just running and playing. And what I realized is he was like, we just got dudes and we got to play. And it wasn't like he got lazy. It was more, here are the guys I have and what's going to give us the best chance of success. And similarly with Coach K at Duke, he was not as big into this is our system and we're going to do this. And coming from a system program like Davidson, that's what I did early on. And for a good part of my career here, and in the last few years, I've gone, wait a second, what do we have to do to have the best chance of success? Personalizing our motion, personalizing our D, as we've talked about a few times, changing our system a little bit, tweaking it here, playing faster, slowing it down. Like this is not about doing the system that makes me feel comfortable with my OCD mind. This is about what do we do to give ourselves the best chance? So that adaptability and flexibility, I think, is a big part of sustained success. And it was hard for me. I think we've done it better the last 3 or 4 years, though.
So I can't let you go without talking about ball screens since that's such a part of the game nowadays. And maybe let's get some of your thoughts on maybe where you're at with ball screen defense and then maybe what you see evolving in the future.
Yeah, sure. First, I think it's evolved so much where when I was playing, everyone hedged up the court. And I think over time, people wanted to get away from rotations. And also, I know with us anyway, our bigs fouled doing that. And you don't want your bigs in foul trouble. So then it's evolved. And we had this experience. It's actually the year we were number one in the country, and Rochester came down here. And they had, which is different for our level, they had a 6'10" guy that if you got too high on the ball screen, they lobbed it to the rim. And then the point guard using the ball screen shot behind. And then if you tried to hedge it, they slipped. So we're sitting here for 2 days going, we've got to figure this out. Like we've got to do something where we can limit these 3 things. And what we came up with, which I think people do, but for us, we had to get the mentality and the technique, was just like making it a 2-man operation. Where basically, I think a lot of people would call it drop coverage, but I think it's a little more nuanced than that, where we call it stick veer, which means stick gives the guy, the guard, it's your guy, stick with him. Like stick to him and stick with him. And you're not getting any help. That's your mentality. Now, if you get crushed or the guy sets him moving and it's not called, now the big can veer him off. But by doing that, you don't get slipped. By doing that, you generally give up the lob if the big gets good at playing two, or if the guard does a good job getting over. And then also, if you've got a guy that can shoot behind you, the guard through scouting would go over rather than under. So just that's a lot of things that the normal fan wouldn't really understand is going on. But that's our base D. And then we've added, like a lot of people, like icing when we can. We've added a flat hedge, and we would love to switch, but that kind of depends on personnel year by year.
And I love that. To keep it 2-on-2 and to make it 2-on-2 obviously simplifies everything for everyone. And certainly if we're talking about like 90% of youth basketball, high school and below, switching is probably the easiest and the best option to be able to do that. But I want to qualify that and say switching to force it back where it came, not switching to let it keep going where it's trying to go, because then you truly are making it 2-on-2 and you're not involving the weak side. And then also, like a term, just picking up from the NBA and talking to a lot of people in the NBA over the last few years, to be able to flood early with the help and to be able to try and take away the perception of space on ball screen. Easier said than done, obviously, at that level when there's so much gravity on the floor. But at college level and below, there's usually more possibilities to be able to flood space early and almost shrink the floor for the offense in their perception of what is possible or what is available. And then that allows you to do what you're saying even more, I feel, which is to play out of more 2-on-2, whether it's a shallow drop, you're a little bit more up on the screen, whatever it is. That's the thing about drop now. I don't think there's one level of drop that anyone would ever plays at. And it's somewhat personnel dependent. And another coach told me that the problem with drop is that they feel like their big gets disengaged, that they're not as involved. Like they don't think they're as responsible. As much as we tell them you're responsible, they're not. So varying where they play actually helps them be more engaged as well. So different thoughts like that.
Yeah, and we don't use the term drop. We have a bunch of crazy terms, not the universal terms. So I sometimes have to learn from Shane is on Twitter giving me all the universal terms so I don't sound like an idiot. But we don't like drop off in the paint. We tell our guys pretty specifically, be a step and a half off. So it's almost like a hedge, but you're moving backwards. And we'll show them film. If you step up, you're dead. If you step up, you're dead because the guy's behind you. So you've got to be like, you got to have this act to stop the guard, make him freeze, and then you're backing up playing too. So
what do you think about the concept on that of not letting it go where it's trying to go? Like for even a flat hedge a little bit is bluff a little bit to act like you're hedging out, but you're not, right? Just to make the ball have to pause or think about going straight.
Yeah. And I think some of the NBA teams with a pretty stationary 5-man, they're probably really deep off, but they got guards that can like work like dogs. Like they're just like over under and they're getting back. And unless the guard is really good and can snake and do all that, I think that a lot of guards at that level can get through screens and recover and get back in front of their guy. Maybe that's wrong, but
I love it. It's such a mentality. And I do believe there's incredible value, especially from a development standpoint, probably within practice phases of your season too, to be able to tell your guys, listen, we're just not helping you. You figure out how to get over it, under it, whatever you got to do. You can't give up the shot. You got to recover. And then I think to a certain extent, the favorite thing I say in practice all the time is figure it out. This is the task. You figure it out. And I think a certain amount of that is probably where it's going, just because the offense is becoming so adaptable.
And the figure it out piece, I heard the NBA, they say fix it. Something happens, like just fix it. I think figure it out. I like that better at our level, just in terms of something's about to happen and just do what's best. And it definitely helps when we have now a sophomore on our team. He's the best I've ever seen getting through ball screens. So we're like, hey, you're on your own. Like you're that good. So the big will help if he's needed, but he's that good to just destroy ball screens. And that's something we have not had. So as a coach, I feel like really fortunate.
Did you ever ask him how he's developed that?
He's quick as lightning, quite frankly. But he's also tough. He's quick, he's tough, he's smart, he sees it, but
But somewhere along the way, he's learned the value of that too. So I'm curious if somebody connected that for him. That's an elite superpower.
Yeah. And we definitely promote that and build him up on it because it is so important. Really, he's a smaller guard. I think it's just a survival mechanism. He's like, hey, if I'm going to play or get through screens, I can't get hit. I got to get through. And Yeah, he's just really tough and really smart, so he can do it.
Just connecting that for you and everyone, like I talk a lot about your reality. So there's no weaknesses. It's what is your reality? And then what is your superpower that you can overcome that reality? Because we've got to find something. Otherwise, basketball is not going to be as much fun for you. So that's the idea. So I love that connection there for that player has found what is his reality and what does he do to solve it? And that's beautiful. Isn't that awesome?
And I like to recruit them at this age where they already have that stuff established, and we just use it to our advantage.
I get that. And obviously you've done a great job of recruiting to be able to sustain this success. But I also know that you're getting imperfect players somewhat too at the Division III level to a certain extent. Maybe they're an elite player, but they're not at this right size for the next level, whatever it is. There's always some reality. And it's really impressive, Coach. I got to say, diving deeper, as I said, I've heard your name for a long time. I've followed your program, but to be able to talk to you and be able to dive a little bit deeper on synergy and some of the different things has been awesome. So I just want to thank you so much for sharing the game with us.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to get some ideas from you as well. Like a lot of this is, as coaches, we're in our own heads like 365 days a year. And to talk about it with someone who's an expert and get some feedback on it and ideas is really helpful. So I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And I'll make sure I edit that part where you said I'm an expert, but I'm doing my best to help support coaches, and it's been a lot of fun. So thanks, Coach.